have to look at word origins. So that's why I'm saying the standard of reference for a dictionary is not just that it does that, but it tells you what language the word came from and how it changed over time. Souls of white folk. High in the tower where I sit above the loud complaining of the human sea, I know many souls that toss and whirl and pass, but none there are that intrigue me more than the souls of white folk. Of them I am singularly clairvoyant. So that's seventh sun, second sight thing. I see in and through them. I view them from unusual points of vantage. Not as a foreigner do I come, for I am native, not foreign, bone of their thought and flesh of their language. Mine is not the knowledge of the traveler or the colonial composite of dear memory, word, and wonder. So what he's describing here is different points of view. Where, I don't know what contemporary social, what you learned in social science, social studies in high school, but in my high school, when we studied de Tocqueville. And Alexis de Tocqueville was a French writer who came to early America and was basically talking about the American experiment from the point of view of what who was it, Cheney or whatever, called Old Europe. And what was unique about America and how America couldn't have happened in Europe by getting rid of kings and so royalty is supposedly and coming up with a democracy, albeit a democracy based on, whites only and rich white men only as the body politic. So mine is not the knowledge of the traveler or the colonial composite of dear memory, words, and wonder, because the colonial story is telling, how great the good old days were. In America, this is how great the 50s were. Let's get back to the good old days when men were men and women knew their place and minorities knew their place and, we had good old family values, et cetera, et cetera. The good old days like that ain't today. Nor is my knowledge yet that which servants have of masters or massive class or capitalists of artisan. Rather, I see these souls undressed, and from the back and side, I see the working of their entrails. I know their thoughts, and they know that I know. This knowledge makes them now embarrassed, now furious. They deny my right to live and be, and call me misbirth. The discovery of personal whiteness among the world's peoples is a very modern thing, a 19th and 20th century matter indeed. The ancient world would have laughed at such a distinction. Here he's talking about ancient history as it was. Basically, for the ancient Romans, so if you understand, for example, the concept of white supremacy originating in the universities of Germany, from the point of view of the Romans, wait, you people were in animal skins when we conquered you. How do you have any claim to superiority at all? So that's what he's talking about. The ancient world, racism as we know it today is only 700 years old, and where it came from, the ancient world goes, no, you ain't superior to these black folks. They're honorable, they're ancient, from the point of view of the Romans and the Greeks, as they wrote about the black people around them. So in order to form white supremacy, you actually have to forget Greek and Roman history, as the Greeks and Romans wrote it. Right? So it's a construct, like we were talking about the other day. Race is a social construct. It can be constructed for equality or can be constructed the opposite of that. This assumption of all the hues of God, whiteness alone is inherently and obviously better than brownness or tan, leads to curious acts. Even the sweeter souls of the dominant world, as they discourse with me on weather, weal, and woe, are continually playing above their actual words an obligato of tune and tone saying. So, any musicians? What's obligato? It's a continuous, it's usually played on like wind instruments or piano or whatever. It's a continuous rhythmic theme. Continue playing above their actual words an obligato of tune and tone, saying, "My poor unwhite thing, weep not or rage, I know too well that the curse of God lies heavy on you. Why? That is not for me to say, but be brave. Do your work in your lowly sphere, praying the good Lord that into heaven above, where all is love, you may one day be born white." I do not laugh. I am quite straight-faced as I ask soberly, "But what on earth is whiteness that one should so desire it?" Then always, somehow, some way, silently but clearly, I'm given to understand that whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever. Amen. Now, what he's actually reporting actual attitudes around him in the 20s. And this was forming social policy. We'll talk about Robeson later, but Du Bois is on the right. So this is a poem, so don't think of this as a construct. This is just me writing, okay? Now, where this came from, the idea is this. In Western psychology, Freud in particular, what is the human psyche like? What is it made of? Three things. Okay? Id, ego, superego. So id is your primal drives. Hunger, thirst, sex. Okay? When somebody is an idiot, they are ruled by this and not their ego. Okay? Your ego, because of your social training, that is the superego, what society says is right or wrong, if your id says, I gotta go pee, you don't go pee in the potted plant if you stand up to pee. If you sit down to pee, that would never occur to you. For those of us who stand to pee, okay, we are not like dogs. Don't lift our leg. We hold it. We go to the bathroom because of our social training. All right? What Freud basically thought is the pressure between the ego, superego, and the id are played out in the ego as neuroses. Now, if you notice this construct, where is the spirit in here? Well, the spirit is in the superego only to the degree that society defines what spiritual is or not. Right? Because he didn't necessarily think that religion was necessarily a healthy thing. Right? Non-observant Jew. Should have listened to his grandparents, but what can I say? I just had good relations in mind. All right? So, when they say you're in an accident, paramedics come to you and they do what we call an assessment, oriented times 3. What is that? Okay? Who you are. What's your name? You know your name. Where you are, right? Time of day, what day of the week it is. Who's president? Where you are. You oriented times 3, right? So again, that's based on this model. Oriented times 3. Now, in African psychology, we're different. So it'll be soul-oriented times 5. Right? Which is where the poem is coming from. So in Roots, we saw the movie Roots, Behold the only thing greater than thyself, and they're holding up the young Kunta Kinte up to the star field. This is the only thing that's greater than you. Inscribed on Luxor Temple in Kemet or Egypt, know thyself. And we define soul as your invisible essence, as I was talking about, I think, a couple of weeks ago here when someone asked me down at the cafeteria, when do you think life is, when does life begin? And I said, life begins before conception, from the point of view of the soul. The body's just clothes that the soul wears. Anyway, who are you before you were born? So Oriented times 5 consists of asking 5 questions. Who were you before you were born? Now, for most people, they don't think about that. It's not in their conceptual framework. So we go with, who are you before you woke up? In your dream. Who are you in your deepest dreams? Who will you be in your life? That is, your life mission, your life lessons. Why are you here? Who will you be after you die? Now, in all practicality, you can't answer these questions in that order unless you already have the awareness of being oriented times 5. Usually people start with 3. And then you can go do 4. And then maybe you can get to 2. And then 1, and then 5. Maybe you never get to 1. Depends. But here's the thing. If your culture does not teach you how to answer those questions, you can be controlled. And so one of the things that I would say, if you're going to become an activist, it's not just you have to overcome the fear of death. You have to be able to be willing to build something that will survive you if you are dead. So that only comes after you don't, it's not that you're suicidal. No, there's nothing you can do to me. Nothing. I'm already bigger than you. And you have the potential to be bigger too. So it brings to you a certain power. And that's the power of definition, and that's what requires, one of the things that's required of a culture changer. So Yoruba proverb, may my outer head not spoil my inner head. That is, your outer head is the face that you present to the world, and your inner head is your inner world. So, who are you before you were born? Who are you before you woke up? Who are you in your deepest dreams? Who will you be in your life? Who will you be after you die? All right, so to the degree that you can culturally self-define those answers, to that degree can you be autonomous. In psychology, we talk about an internal locus of control. That means you're the shot caller within you, not society, not the people around you. All right, so now this is separate. This is Naeem Akbar. So if this actually were to show up on a midterm or something like that, you can make the distinction and not use soul-oriented times 5 for this. All right, so Naeem Akbar, still alive, contemporary African-American psychologist. So, know yourself, your ego. And this is from the African point of view, the depth of your soul, the health of your body, the clarity of your mind. All those who face the same struggle you do are with you. Your ancestors are with you. Anybody that faced the problems that you're facing, you have access to them, particularly if they're in your genetic line. So all those who face the same struggle you do are with you. As allies, those you know now. As ancestors, those who have gone before. So it starts with the African self in this framework starts with the soul. That is the individual infinite, if you will. The soul, that is in Comedian, the Ka, soul, inhabits the Ba, body. As in Kaaba, as in body and soul, cuerpo de alma. Your mind, so soul inhabits the body. Body is where your mind is identifying. So your personal part of your mind is not just your thoughts, but also your emotions, dreams, etc. Your social, you have a social self that is a relational self, relation to all the people that are around you. And then you have a tribal ancestral self that is the larger identification of who your people are and all the people in your genetic line that are no longer in body, including in ancestral, in this framework, unborn children. Have I referenced Daughters of the Dust yet? I have to call Julie and see if she can get permission to this. I don't normally, in years past, I've shown movies as part of the class, particularly if they're, you see my penchant for black authors, so black movie makers. Daughters of the Dust is a movie made from this framework where you have this Geechee or Gullah family. So if you don't know your African cultural geography, the Geechee people are black people who live in the Georgia Sea Islands, so Georgia and North Carolina islands off the coast, right off the coast, and they maintain an original African and African American culture, more African based than American based. They've been facing, so basically this movie is being detailed in the first initial pressure of the first generation out of slavery to assimilate into mainstream American culture. So you have the matriarch of the family, Mama Pesant, who we see in the movie sitting at her husband's grave, and she's talking to him, and she talks to him every day as if he's still alive. Because in her worldview, he is still alive. And she's into her herbs and her potions and growing her garden and, doing these things that look, initially strange, but one of her daughters is apprenticing to her with, learning the herbs, and another daughter has decided to become a Bible thumper. Rather fundamentalist, and mama, you got to give up those African ways. Those are the ways of the devil, and give yourself to sweet Jesus. And of course, it's King James Version and white Jesus. And she's learned that from the mainland. And Mama Pesant is not putting her down. She says, I can't give up my ways. But you new folks, you young folks, you have to go do what you need to do. So there's a certain tension going on between one of the daughters and her husband, and we find out that she got raped by a white man, and she's pregnant. So they know who did it, and the woman who's pregnant does not tell her husband because she doesn't want him to get killed. Don't keep bothering about, this child is yours, this child is yours. And it is. Because how we know this is the film is narrated by an unborn child who isn't born during the movie. And she's saying, Grandma, Mama Pesant called out to the ancestors heard, and boom, I came to Mama. And so she's, narrating this film about these different tensions at, the turn of the century. And it's a black woman who wrote it, black actors. It's pretty amazing. Daughters of the Dust, Julie Dash. So, African self. So, the ancestors, those who have gone before, show us what is possible. Our allies help us make what is possible happen, even if it has never been done before. So, the African self, soul, body, mind, social, relational, tribal, ancestral. Any confusion when I say oriented times 5, basically that's where I'm coming from, reflecting this reality. Who were you before you were born? Can you answer that? Well, yes, I can. But that's another story. Ritam Parambhagyam is a phrase out of Sanskrit. It is, if it ever was. Still is, if it ever was. Okay, so the African self is rooted in the soul, and each level is an individualized connection to a greater whole. But it starts with the spiritual, soul, first. So unlike Freud, which doesn't really have the spiritual explicitly in it, that's where we start. So give reverence to the ancestors. You pour libations. You know your history. You know the history of your tribe and the tribe of your, not only your ancestors, but your enemies too, as well as your allies. So in the 19th century, demographics, if you will. In 1880 to 1900, there were 6.5 million African Americans in the United States. 90% of them lived in the South. After slavery, theoretically. So, 80% of those who live in the South live in the rural South, a few as landowners of small farms, and most as tenant farmers or what's called sharecroppers. Okay, you can do that. Thank you. So, a sharecropper paid rent to work the land they lived on and was paid either in cash or in a share of the crop, hence the term. Remember what I was saying about blackmail the other day? Okay? Similar situation. Came out of that. Never get ahead. Think payday loans. Same idea. Think revolving credit, where the interest rate is above 19%. You can never pay it off if you pay the minimum payment. That's the idea. All right, so they had to pay rent to white landowners and pay inflated prices to white merchants for goods at stores. Now, you might think, okay, well, why would they do that? Probably didn't have a choice. So why wouldn't they have a choice?
The landowner was paying them the personal bucks they couldn't spend at the store.
Okay, that's one. What else? There were laws doing what? Sure, right. Part of the black codes is it might be illegal for you as a black person to own land. It might be illegal for a black person with a college degree to work outside of agriculture. Right? So you might be forced to live within this particular circumstance. So, 21st century segregation, to make the connections, 21st century basically occurs along lines of what we call class. It's not just race anymore. Reinforced by intentionally limiting numeracy in everyday transactions such as credit, student loans, etc. Numeracy is to mathematics what literacy is to reading. Simply understanding numeric relationships, how they work. Fractions, percentages, interest rates, etc. What that means. Investing, the difference between investing and spending, all this other stuff, right? So if you don't understand differences between, for example, fixed and revolving credit, then you can be exploited and kept in a condition of credit servitude similar to sharecroppers. Okay, so they just expanded the system and moved it into a different sphere. You think that you have freedom because you got a Best Buy card or a Walmart card or whatever. Yeah, watch that. Pay cash or do without. Can't pay cash, make sure you buy something that you can pay off inside of 6 months with equal payments. Okay? So, except that, of course, you only get a share of the wealth, similar to smelling the baked goods and getting leftover crumbs, but not actually owning the bakery. Okay? And that's what, for example, before we get to this time period, that's one of the things that Malcolm X talked about. Great. So you get to ride at the front of the bus. How about driving the bus? How about owning the bus line? All right, so sharecropping is basically an extension of slavery. Naturally, people were kept in debt as it was hard with the arrangement to get ahead financially, assuming they had the skills to do financial planning, which were they going to learn that? So one of my let's see, grandma's grandma. Oh, my grandmother's father. You don't know him. Grandpa Abe Stewart. Professor Abe Stewart. So he basically taught school, a two-room schoolhouse, and he was actually teaching sharecroppers, okay, if you're getting 50 cents for your 100-pound bag of cotton, better make sure the scale is working properly and what you should be getting. So you would teach basic math and being able, because, who owned the scale at the cotton gin? It was white guys who often did not keep the scale adjusted properly, right? So people would say, you must have gone to Abe. So it's a dangerous position actually to teach people numeracy. All right, so where do you get that skill? You could do it yourselves or go to segregated schools, which wasn't an entirely bad thing. Segregated schools meaning you had black teachers teaching black students. In New York City, where you had that situation, those schools could be open to whites, but they were called African free schools because it was black teachers teaching black students. So segregation wasn't entirely a bad thing because then you could basically have curriculum like this. And they did. I'm basically teaching a curriculum that was taught in my family for generations, given certain books. So many of us are raised by old school, learned from McGuffey's readers, all right? So McGuffey's readers were published in 1836, used for about 80 years by 80% of American school children. From that point, they were still in use when I was in school, and we had, in addition to our Encyclopedia Britannica, a McGuffey's reader. And we were basically told by our parents and relatives, look, this is the colonialist story. Okay, this is the level of English you need to aspire to, but you need to surpass it and be able to basically use it in our own language. Okay, so uplift from slavery begins with literacy and numeracy. So translated to today's 5 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, rights, responsibilities. Okay, home training basically includes politeness, and politesse, which is similar to politeness, but it means that you know how to act around people who act differently than you. And you shift for that. So not just general politeness, but how different people consider what politeness is. Let's see. Nobody has a Bible on them, right? Okay, 2 Philippians, the platinum rule. Do unto others the way they want to be done unto, even if that's better than you. So what's the golden rule? Do unto others as, okay, all right. Platinum rule, which is more valuable, gold or platinum, okay. Doing unto others the way they want to be done unto, because they might want to be done unto in a different way than you, and so you have to know what that is, and even if that's better than you, do it. 2 Philippians, I think, is verse 2 or 3, somewhere there. Something about vainglory or whatever. Anyway, you can check it out on your own, because it is biblically based. All right? That's politesse. Have you ever been arrested? I was arrested once when I was 17. 17 arrests? No, officer. I was arrested once when I was 17. What was that for, theft? Okay. Do I lose it? No. Level voice, increased addiction, hyper respectful. Person with a gun expects respect. Am I treating the cop better than what okay, you are dissing me and you are being institutionally racist, but I'm not going to say that. Okay? I'm going to treat them better than they treated me. Well, sure. Sure. Especially when we met up late, a year or two ago, and I was in a position of even greater power, so. People don't necessarily diss me to my face. And if they're going to say anything else, I can defend myself quite handily. There's a poem between these, so when we talk about diunital logic, there's at least two different modes about how you survive in a racist white society. So Booker T. Washington, who wrote the book, wrote his life story called Up from Slavery, was into industrial education. So industrial education is that he believed that black people should basically not strive to feel or act superior, but accommodate. Don't directly confront racism. Which is a good it is a good survival strategy in the South, where if you're uppity, they'll kill you. So, for example, he would say something like racial accommodation, gradualism. That is, okay, don't try to push the river, just, operate in your sphere, cast down your bucket where you are. The Atlantic Compromise was basically a compromise in which essentially he people were being openly racist and disrespectful, and okay, we're just going to compromise. We're not going to be confrontational. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, yes, we are going to confront racism. We are going to call it out. You saw his writing. And the way we're going to do it is, with such, high-level language that, in order to read it, you have to be able to think at that level and understand it and operate on that level and then be comfortable with operating on that level. So, confrontation of inequality, uplift through activism and scholarship. So it's not just getting a trade or working a trade, but going to college, becoming professionals. So one of his essays is on Booker T. Washington in that book. But here's a poem. It seems to me, said Booker T., it shows a mighty lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek. When Mr. Charlie, that's a code name for a white man, when Mr. Charlie needs a hand to hoe the cotton on his land, and when Miss Ann, code name for white women, looks for a cook, why stick your nose inside a book? I don't agree, said W.E.B. If I should have the drive to seek knowledge of chemistry or Greek, I'll do it. Miss Charles and Miss can look another place for hand or cook. Some men rejoice in skill of hand, and some in cultivating land. But there are others who maintain the right to cultivate the brain. It seems to me, said Booker T., that all you folks have missed the boat, who shout about the right to vote, and spend vain days and sleepless nights in uproar over civil rights. Just keep your mouths shut, do not grouse, but work and save and buy a house. I don't agree, said W.E.B. For what can property avail if dignity and justice fail? Unless you help make the laws, they'll steal your house with trumped-up claws. A rope's as tight, a fire as hot, no matter how much cash you've got. Speak soft and try your little plan, but as for me, I'll be a man. It seems to me, said Booker T. I don't agree, said W.E.B. So, one of these, radical, conservative radical, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but a conservative radical would be for social change as fast as possible without resorting to violent revolution. Okay, so there is a dichotomy. There is basically dichotomous logic and diunital logic. We have certain phrases or Shibboleth. Have I defined Shibboleth? Did I talk about that yesterday? No? Okay. Ku Klux Klan is a separate thing that we'll consider, if not today, a little later. Shibboleth. Literally means, in Hebrew, a torrent of water. Essentially a stream, but it has come to mean, so in two different dialects, you can either pronounce the T and leave the H silent or pronounce the H. Shibboleth or Shibboleth. Depending on how you pronounce it, it marks you as a foreigner or part of the Allied Army, who they're using to test, using your pronunciation of this word to test whether you're friend or foe. It has since come to mean One of the contemporary ways we think about it today is a dog whistle. Okay, that is a whistle that only dogs can hear, but when we're talking about contemporary racism, people will say certain phrases that don't seem overtly racist, but they are a code, like welfare, like crime, like urban, like, right, okay, those are shibboleths, okay? So it's a phrase that marks somebody as coming from a particular point of view. Now, if you go to slide, please, text, all right? Red-blooded American. Now, who is or what is a red-blooded American? If all humans have red blood. What's a red-blooded American? It means white, yes, but what do they mean by that? Red-blooded. Well, there's blue-blooded. So what does blue-blooded mean? That's good.
Rich.
Rich, okay. And why? Where'd that come from? Kings and queens. Can you down the audio? Thanks. Okay, blue bloods, kings and queens, who had a genetic condition, okay, where they got pale. They were anemic. Their blood didn't fix oxygen very well. They were considered blue bloods. And that was a symbol of royal blood, royal blood. So, red-blooded American means that you are racially pure. And racially pure enough to join the Klan. And I'll show you that probably in a little later. But when we say something is grandfathered in, that basically dates back to the grandfather clause, where you could only vote if your grandfather could vote. The determination of the term uppity. Uppity Negroes were people who sought equality with whites. Du Bois was uppity. Booker T. Washington was not. Oh, I do have it. This is an application for the Ku Klux Klan. Now, there are some people that think I really over-obsess on it, but I think really you got to study these folks. They are, as Spock or Tuvok would say, fascinating. So, number 7, it's difficult to read these, right? But, number 7, were your parents born in the United States of America? Are you a Gentile or a Jew? Of what race, color, do you believe in the principles of a pure Americanism? Do you believe in white supremacy? Oh, well, that's pretty raw and up front. Do you owe any kind of allegiance to any foreign nation, government, institution, sect, people, ruler, or person? Mostly what they're asking about is, are you Catholic, and do you owe allegiance to the Pope in Rome rather than America? All right? So this is the patch that's on that Klansmen wear. Notice that there's a drop of red blood in the middle. Okay? So from their point of view, and the use of the term red-blooded American is from the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, white racial purity. Are you white Anglo-Saxon Protestant? Are you pure? That is an American. Okay, when Sarah Palin talks about being a real American, that's where that's coming from. The phrase red-blooded American. Oh, we don't want no immigrants. We don't. And at this time, when they're talking about, they're talking about Italians are not Americans. Swedes are not Americans. Jews are not Americans. Racial purity. Pure American. Wait. Thought the Constitution said if I'm born here, I'm American. And they're not asking about my blood. So what does it mean, red-blooded American? Okay? Only makes sense from the Klan. I may be crazy, I'm just saying. These are the only people concerned with racial purity before we even have a science of genetics. This is basically dating back to the Inquisition, where the inquisitors are basically saying you have Jewish blood or Moorish blood in your face. Your face ain't red. What are they talking about? Well, they don't have genetics either in the 15th century. Skin color. Okay? Racial purity. So basically this is essentially you have plantation landowners and slaves paid for example, this is basically looking at the profit of slavery. Okay? So if you bought a slave, somewhere between $800 in the contemporary dollars at the time and $1,500 at auction, right? Over the lifetime of the slave, basically all you had the slaves are only paid room and board. That means you could make 1,500% profit. That's 1.5 million per slave. And all that money was handed down in the family and represents a body of wealth that was essentially handed down to now what used to be plantation landowners, which was families, is now multinationals, where they're essentially paying really what amounts to room and board and making millions off of your labor. Okay, so basically we're saying chattel slavery, form of capitalism, or what we would call amoral capitalism, where, okay, there's a social contract which says, look, honest day's work, honest day's labor, but, you know, I need to be able to live on what you pay me, and it needs to be commensurate with the effort that I'm putting in, rather than keeping me in a dependent position. So understand what was happening with slavery. 1,500% profit. So if I were, again, doing drawing, so we're talking about, you know, how is this reinforced in contemporary life? The college and university system is a way of doing that. Okay? So what is happening here is you have the ivory tower, right? And you have a gate. So where is the most powerful position in a corporation? No, the most powerful position in a corporate building is the CEO on the first floor? No, upper floor. Right? And how do you get to see the CEO? Can you just walk in there? No. Have to make an appointment, have to go through a bunch of folks, right? The ivory tower, that is academe, built on that same model. Okay? You have gatekeepers. You have to know the right words, the right phrases, speak well, write well. Can you do your numbers? And then you rise up in the hierarchy. Now, what happens if you don't make it in the ivory tower? You work for the ivory tower, yes. Or you work in the shadow of the ivory tower. Okay? Now the reason I'm going through this is in the late 1800s, late 19th century, when black people are just starting to get into college, they're attempting to create this world within segregation. This world is segregated. Okay? Because the colleges and universities are teaching a curriculum that justifies that separation. Social Darwinism, manifest destiny. Y'all people you function best when you function in your place. And your place is below us. Right? And you can be janitors, but no, you can't be professors. But we see people breaking that mold. So, in the shadow of an ivory tower, it's kind of cold because it's not necessarily in its sunlight, but you create your own world. And your own healing within inside segregation. Okay, and we do that. And that's one of the things Du Bois is talking about, and a number of great thinkers are saying, look, okay, we're dealing with segregation. We can create our own schools. We can create our own scholarship. We can create our own curriculum, our own libraries. Because they're keeping that stuff away from us. So we need to do it on our own. And we'll include whoever wants to come in here. And so when I give this model about, okay, this is not only how are people kept separate, how are people kept down? Well, they're made intentionally ignorant. When they don't even know that they're ignorant. Ida Wells Barnett. So, one of the things, and I think there's a slide that mentioned this, but I will mention it in the closing 5 minutes. You may have heard of the phrase, the gay 90s. Now, this was a time when gay did not mean homosexual. It meant happy. Okay? The gay 90s was a time of lynchings of black people. And this is what Ida B. Wells Barnett is recording in her book, A Red Record. Remember when I was telling you a week or so ago that, let's say the Ku Klux Klan in its entire history lynched 10,000 people? It's her that's documenting that. And that's what a red record is. So men were taken from their homes by red shirt bands, stripped, beaten, and exiled. Others were assassinated when their political prominence made them obnoxious to their political opponents, while the Ku Klux barbarism of election days, reveling in the butchery of thousands of colored voters, furnished records and congressional investigations that are a disgrace to civilization. The alleged men, people are getting killed trying to vote when they have a legal right to vote. Right, and she's counting them. The alleged menace of universal suffrage having been avoided by the absolute suppression of the Negro vote, the spirit of mob murder should have been satisfied and the butchery of Negroes should have ceased. But men, women, and children were the victims of murder by individuals and murdered by mobs, just as they had been when killed at the demands of the unwritten law to prevent Negro domination. Negroes were killed for disputing over terms of contract with their employers. A few barns were burned. Some colored man was killed to stop it. Colored man resented the imposition of a white man, and the two came to blows. The colored man had to die, either at the hands of the white man then and there, or later at the hands of a mob that speedily gathered. If he showed a spirit of courage and manhood, he was hanged for his pains, and the killing was justified by the declaration that he was a saucy nigger. That don't mean he tastes good. That means he's showing spunk and little fire there. Colored women have been murdered because they refused to tell the mobs where relatives could be found for lynching bees, not like a spelling bee, lynching bees. Boys of 14 years old have been lynched by white representatives of American civilization. In fact, for all kinds of offenses and for no offense. From murder to misdemeanors, men and women were put to death without judge or jury, so that although the political excuse was no longer necessary, the wholesale murder of human beings went on just the same. I'm going to go easy on you. We'll end with T. Thomas Fortune. Next week we will probably, it'll get hairier for you. Sorry. Oh well. Can't just leave it on lynching, you know. But at least on an upful note, T. Thomas Fortune. All right, so see you next week with a brand new show. Yeah, 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 sure.